This is the Canna Mom Show, a podcast chronicling the inspiring stories of real women in the emerging cannabis industry. Your host, Joyce Gerber, mom, lawyer, political activist, has been speaking with women from coast to coast and around the world who are leaders in the revolution of cannabis and caregiving, continuing on her mission to lift up the stories of the women creating the cannabis industry by sharing their canna stories with you. So go make yourself a cup of tea or roll yourself a joint, sit back, and learn something new about this magical plant on The Canna Mom Show with Joyce Gerber.
From the Tip O'Neill Studios in North Cambridge, Massachusetts, it's The Canna Mom Show. Now here's your host, Joyce Gerber.
And welcome back to The Canna Mom Show, where we continue on our mission of crushing cannabis stigma. All right, so Dave, the Ganja Goddess Gala this weekend in Orange, Massachusetts was so fun.
Cool. What was it like?
Anyone who's not from Massachusetts, Orange, Massachusetts was an old industrial sort of town that was not treated very well when manufacturing left. A lot of old mills, and there was a mansion, the Revival Wheeler Mansion, which was abandoned apparently at some point. There was water damage, and the woman who bought it should have her own TV show. She bought it sight unseen on an auction, and this is her 14th rehab, I guess. She's one of those people.
14th time she's gone through rehab?
Where she's done, maybe. No, where she's like taken a unit and a dilapidated house. I flipped it. I guess.
House. Got it.
Yeah, but I don't think she's really flipping this. It's a mansion. Anyway, right. So it was middle Orange, Massachusetts, this big mansion, and it was just beautiful. It wasn't completely done, but our room was really so beautifully appointed, and I have some pictures on Instagram, and the event was in the backyard, or her yard, where there was a tent and music, but she also had just planted trees because she's going to have a maze.
Oh, really?
Back. Yeah.
With using like kind of shrubbery or actual trees or like shrubs?
Yeah, so the shrubs were very short now, and, everyone was stoned, so getting around it, even when it wasn't really. But she had lights, colored lights. It was fun.
There's one of those mazes at this kind of public garden in Vermont somewhere, which I can't remember exactly where it is, but I've been there, and I got lost in there. We had to, a friend of mine and I, we had to go rogue to like burst through some bushes to get out, because it's amazing the time it must take to put into that to come up with the maze. Eventually, we figured it out.
I guess, it was interesting to see it with the trees low, because you could actually see the path, but it's still, I don't know, it's tricky.
It was still hard.
It was still hard. Anyways, it was fun. It was a really beautiful night. I brought my husband. We stayed overnight. She gave us a whole history. She gave us a whole tour of the mansion, kind of going over everything that had been there before. There'd been a nursing home, so she's trying to tell us which ghosts were there, and she gave us some like examples of weird things that happened with technology. So she's pretty sure there's some ghosts, but I didn't see any or experience any.
You stayed over there?
Oh yeah, it was like a bed and breakfast. So it's a beautiful mansion that she's converted into like a 11-room bed and breakfast.
You didn't hear any creaks or shrieks late at night?
Mm-mm. Although we did visit we visited a really cool cemetery. My husband loves old cemeteries. It was one of those with the old, like from the 1800s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one in Sharon that I sometimes go by, and I think it's fascinating because you look at what you learn. Obviously, just a couple things about the person from the headstone, but you just wonder what life was like back then, and sometimes you even find someone who was born in 1732 but lived to like 91 or something. It's like, wow. So very cool.
They saw a lot. It's very interesting, old cemeteries, and it was just really a beautiful, strangely beautiful weekend in Massachusetts. So all good, and it wasn't that far away. I thought it was farther.
No, you shoot right out the Pike, right? Or 495.
No, Route 2. We took Route 2. It was like a scenic drive.
Okay.
Yeah, beautiful.
Even
I know
better.
you've been to Amherst. Yeah, you're out there. All right. Let's see what else is going down. So that was fun. We are on our countdown to our final episode. We have 2 more after today. It's actually kind of hard to believe.
It's the farewell tour.
Farewell tour.
I don't want to think about it, Joyce.
Yeah, but I was listening to this great, I don't have a culture corner, but I was listening to my favorite Hidden Brain today. And basically the topic was when trying hard can backfire, and how, like, I think I'm coming into my Confucius age. I've put in a lot of effort in my life. Now I'm trying to be effortless. I'm trying to like just use all the skills I've acquired and I'm not sure what'll happen next. I do like the policy. Something will come up, but um, this podcast, I wouldn't have imagined it last 5 years. I'm proud that it did, and we've really highlighted the stories of a lot of women pioneers. So I feel like that's my value add to the cannabis industry.
No, of course you did, and
Yeah.
just allowing so many people to tell their story, and don't forget every person that appears on the show, they have a bit of a weapon against cannabis stigma anytime they want to pull it out.
Exactly. And I will be, so it was a cannabis friendly event, obviously, at this mansion. And I met quite a few mothers, mothers of young children. And they were talking about this. And, again, they are the people who are crushing the stigma. It's these one-on-ones. It's the personal stories. It's the people saying, I am a really good mom. I'm a really good caregiver. And I use cannabis. I could walk around. I say this all the time. I could have walked around my kid's school with a proud wine mom shirt on. People would have cheered for me. But I could not have smoked a joint before PTA meeting. I would not have fit in.
Yeah. Well, did we talk about this stat on the show that there's a stat that came out that says more Americans are using cannabis recreationally than alcohol? That's amazing.
And
take a bow, Joyce.
Yeah. And I will say, so Dr. Benjamin Kaplan, who's out here in Boston, he was putting out some studies about, again, the way opiates work is they shut down the pain. They literally shut it down so you don't know you're having pain. And the way cannabis works is it reduces the inflammation, which takes away the pain. So there's a really good place for opiates in our medical world, but obviously it's caused a lot of problems, and cannabis can be used for pain. And doctors are talking about it now. There are studies being done now. So it's not just me and my friends. This is and our next guest will talk more about this. But this finally, we can do more studies when it gets rescheduled. Things are happening, and nurses are coming on board because it is a really good option for people.
Well, think about the knowledge about cannabis versus the knowledge about opiates that's occurred over the last 10 years, and it's been a flip flop, really, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So, it's out there. It's a tool in the toolbox. Alcohol's a poison.
Yeah.
We think it's fine. So, yeah.
Yeah. And no, this will sound dark, but no one's ever worried that their kid is, half unconscious under a bridge somewhere from smoking cannabis, using cannabis. It doesn't create that sort of all those health hazards that opiates and other drugs do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not shutting you down. So cannabis. All right. Anything you saw this weekend that you want to recommend for the Culture Corner?
Yes.
Okay.
You want me to play the jingle?
Sure, you can. Yes, you can be
I'll be the Culture Corner guy.
Dave's Corner. Dave's Corner.
The Culture Corner.
Recently released on Netflix, I believe 6-episode limited series called Eric, and it actually does have to do with addiction and not cannabis, but more. It's just a really good story starring Benedict Cumberbatch as a sort of a public television creator in New York City in the early 80s, and he begins struggling with alcohol addiction, and he's losing touch with his young son, who then one day disappears. Concurrently, the Benedict Cumberbatch character begins seeing this imaginary monster that is following him around everywhere, named Eric, which actually was created by the kid. The kid came up with the idea for it. The kid disappears. This big blue monster, Eric, starts appearing, and then Gabby Hoffman plays his wife. She's excellent in everything. And it's kind of a period piece of New York from that period of time when New York was pretty dark and crime-ridden, but also just an exploration into the character of this guy. And Benedict Cumberbatch is excellent. Really strong New York accent. He's not a trace of his British roots. And so I recommend it, Eric, on Netflix.
Excellent. Good for you. You describe things so much better than me. When I try to describe TV shows to people, I'm like, it's that guy that we saw in the thing, and they go places.
Sometimes it's hard. Yeah. Sometimes I'm halfway into explaining a show to someone, and I'm like, you know what? I wouldn't watch it if I just heard that explanation. Sounds like nothing happens. Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's good. Let's go. In New York, yeah. So my sister went to Barnard in the 70s. We dropped her off in like 78. And I remember feeling like we shouldn't have left her there. I was worried. I'm like, should we really leave her here? This doesn't seem right.
Yeah. I mean, I remember having visited New York in that period, and it was scary. I mean, at that time, there were even parts of Boston that were scary, like in the combat zone and everything. And happily, both are better now.
Yes, but I didn't live in Boston. But I remember just being like a little suburban girl being like, I don't know. Amy really wants to be here. But
Yeah.
now look at Manhattan. It's come back. All right. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for the culture corner. That was good. All
Why
right.
not?
So now on to today's guest. All right. Today's guest. She is the director of the Office of Federal Affairs at the Drug Policy Alliance in Washington, D.C., the leading organization in the U.S. working to end the drug war. Today's guest leads the organization's federal legislative agenda and advocacy strategy to end the war on drugs. In this role, she lobbies Congress and the administration on drug policy and criminal legal reform. She is a graduate of the University of Nevada's Reynolds School of Journalism and the UC Berkeley School of Law. She is also a member of the Bar of the District of Columbia, California, and the U.S. Supreme Court. Today's guest has been featured in various media outlets, including The Washington Post, The New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Politico, Latino USA, and now The Canna Mom Show. Please welcome to The Canna Mom Show, Maritza Perez Medina. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Welcome to come in. So as we say here in Massachusetts, you are wicked smart. And this drug policy world you've entered into. So I don't know, maybe this is a professional path. It's pretty unique. How did you get here? What was your decision? How did you come here?
Yeah, so I came here maybe in a little bit untraditional roundabout way. I knew for a long time I wanted to do civil rights work and I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. I didn't know initially what type of civil rights law I wanted to pursue. And it just so happened that right before I entered law school, I started to really think about the criminal justice system. And there were a lot of reasons why I started to think about it. And thankfully in law school, I had the opportunity to take more classes and participate in legal clinics that focus on criminal justice reform. And that really made it clear to me that that was something that I wanted to do. In addition, at the same time, while I was in law school, unfortunately, I experienced the incarceration of a family member, and it just, really clarified it for me that this is the path I want to take. And at the time, a lot of people didn't really think about criminal justice reform as being a civil rights issue. But for me, I saw the through line quite clearly from, how the drug war started and who it targeted to the outcomes that we see in the criminal legal system today. So I began my career actually doing a criminal justice reform fellowship with MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. And I was completing this criminal justice fellowship there and went on to join full staff as a civil rights lawyer with the law firm. But I realized that I wanted to go back to just doing the criminal justice work. I was working on a range of different issues that were great, like, education, immigration, voting rights, all of these things are important. But for me, I went to law school to do criminal justice work. So I wanted to find my way back to that. And I ended up moving to a think tank and working on their criminal justice reform team for a while. And it was when I was there that I really started to work on marijuana specifically.
So is that an issue they were, again, so Dave's a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, we talk about law stuff all the time.
Yeah.
It's just interesting to see how people fall into these paths. So when you were doing the criminal justice, was it talk about drug reform, or was it sort of outside, was it like separate? Like how did it kind of integrate into with the actual work people were doing?
That's a really great question. Yeah. So I guess I'll start when I was at MALDEF. At MALDEF, a lot of my work was around building support for criminal justice reform at the federal level. And this was during the Obama presidency, and the Obama administration was very active on criminal justice reform. So trying to pass bills that definitely address mandatory minimums and drug sentencing. But another part of the work was just calling for clemency and pardons for people who were incarcerated for drug law violations. So that was the intersection there. So at the time, I was already aware of the Drug Policy Alliance where I work now, just because you can't talk criminal justice reform without talking about drugs. And then when I moved to the think tank, at the time, there were many, many states who were starting to decriminalize or legalize marijuana. And we knew that it was only a matter of time before the federal government took that on. So we started to develop different policy positions on federal marijuana reform. Yeah, and so I guess that's how I started to work on it there in the think tank.
So what did you grow up in Washington? Where did you grow up? Where was your
I
home
grew up
base?
in rural Nevada, northeastern Nevada, like
Okay.
close to Idaho and Utah.
Okay. So, and when you were growing up, I mean, what did you think of cannabis, or what did you think of sort of, yeah, I guess cannabis and maybe other drugs in your area? Like, what was your, like I always say, I thought they were dangerous, kill brain cells.
Yeah.
I had a cannabis awakening late in life. I wish I knew earlier. So, yeah, what was your relationship with that?
It's a very good question. I grew up, not only was it a rural part of the country, but it was also really conservative. It's very heavily Mormon, LDS, where I grew
Mhm.
up. And in fact, my dad is Mormon and I was raised in the Mormon church.
Okay.
So, in the Mormon religion, you don't even consume caffeine. On top of that, we were in the DARE programs, and
Right.
like police were a big deal where I was from. They were in
Right.
your schools. They were doing the PAL programs, like the
Hmm.
sports programs. So I kind of drank that Kool-Aid when I was younger because I didn't know any better. I
Yep.
always thought drugs were bad. It was very simple for me.
Yep.
Don't do drugs. Drugs are bad. That started to change, obviously, as I left and started to read more about, really, it was criminal justice. That was like the gateway for me into drug
So that is
policy.
that is interesting, because I always say cannabis affects everything from criminal justice to cosmetics. It's a pretty wide range, and I don't know. I guess I haven't talked to that many people actually doing criminal justice reform. I want to talk more about the Last Prisoners Project because I was down for that. Um, but yeah, this is an interesting idea that it's not just the policies of how people are treated or how they're sentenced. It's deeper than that. It's like, how do they end up here in the first place? Right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
yes. Yep.
Okay. All right. So you kind of got into this. I can ask you about your family later about this. All right. So that's where you sort of started. So what are you doing now? I know I was down there for the Last Prisoners Project. It was fabulous. We talked to Republicans, congressperson from Texas with a friend of mine. We went to see Senator Corwin from Texas as well, and I'm a liberal Democrat. Elizabeth Warren and Diana Presley are my reps. So
Lucky.
that was like a really different kind of meeting for me. And we did see Catherine Clark's office, who was really a different open conversation. So I don't know, just talk a little bit about, I guess maybe um what are you focused on now? I don't know if you want to talk about the Blast Prisons Project specifically. And then I guess that's kind of naturally rolls over into like the reschedule, deschedule conversation, but
Yeah,
maybe just, yeah,
absolutely.
okay. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so right now at DPA, as you shared in the introduction, I run the federal office for the Drug Policy Alliance. What that essentially means is I'm responsible for engaging with Congress and the administration on all of our policy priorities. We
Mhm.
have many policy priorities. Of course, federal marijuana is a huge priority for us.
Mhm.
There's been a lot happening very recently, which I'm happy to talk about in a bit. And yes, we also participated in this lobby day, and it was really a week of action, actually.
Yeah, well, it was a week, yeah.
Yeah, that the Last Prisoner Project helped to coordinate. So I was also there. It was really great. It was really impactful to see people from across the country come to the Hill and lobby on behalf of federal marijuana reform. And I think, the effort was quite successful. Shortly after that, the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, a bill that deschedules marijuana, was reintroduced in Congress. And the bill was reintroduced with 18 senators joining the bill in support, which is quite significant. I mean, that bill was first introduced last Congress, and at the time, it was just the three original co-sponsors, Booker, White, and Schumer. But I think, this solidarity, this action really showed the Senate that this is an important issue that people care about. And we saw that roster of support really blossom, which is wild when you think about it, because Congress is so divided and it's really hard to get people on bills these days. I know, because I have to do this every day. So the fact that the COA had so much support right out the gate, I'm like, wow, that was really incredible. And I'm sure it had a lot to do with the fact that people were there on the Hill advocating for descheduling.
I think it's like the Venn diagram. Like everybody can use cannabis in some way, and I talk about hemp more, but it impacts everybody. So, and it impacts them in different ways. I mean, I talk about it when I talk to Republican Congress people. Maybe I talk about the patriotism of it. This is homegrown, and this is helping your veterans, and it's a different conversation. And sometimes I talk more in the Northeast. We're talking a lot more about criminal justice reform. We're talking more about social equity businesses, and I know there's such a range of ways to talk to people so they can hear you on this issue. I think that's
Yeah.
interesting. You're actually seeing it at that level. All right, reschedule, deschedule. No schedule? Does it go reschedule, get legislation? What happens? What's going on?
Yes, happy to break all of that down.
Yeah.
It's important that we talk about it because I think it's very easy to get confused with all these terms being thrown around and all this news popping up. So I'm happy to talk a little bit about that, but I think I'll start in October of 2022.
Okay.
Because that's when we first heard President Biden make this historic announcement around federal marijuana reform. He pardoned simple marijuana possession cases at the federal level. He encouraged state governors to do the same. And most importantly, I think he asked HHS and the DEA to review marijuana status on the CSA as a Schedule I drug. That is significant for a number of reasons. First and foremost, marijuana has been a Schedule I drug on the CSA since 1970, since the CSA was first passed.
Right.
Schedule I means that, these are the substances that are supposed to be the most susceptible to abuse, that supposedly have no medical value, and they tend to carry harsher criminal penalties. So the fact that he's asking, the government to revisit its status was significant in that sense. From that point on, the Drug Policy Alliance was very vocal about the need for descheduling marijuana. And the reason we were vocal about that is because we know that rescheduling marijuana, in other words, moving marijuana from one number on the Controlled Substances Act to another number, still maintains criminalization at the end of the day. In order to remove criminal penalties and ensure that people don't suffer the collateral consequences of those penalties, in order to stop the prohibition of marijuana, you need to deschedule it. You need to completely remove it off the Controlled Substances Act. So we've been very vocal about that, and we've been trying to do as much public education as possible and pushing lawmakers to act on federal marijuana reform. And I'm glad that we did that because, as you know, very recently, the DEA opened up a public comment period. So they took HHS's recommendation to move marijuana to Schedule III and are now acting on it. And they're also recommending that marijuana be placed on Schedule III. And they've created this opportunity for the public to engage in the process. And they're asking the public to submit public comments to basically share their position on descheduling versus rescheduling, versus, there might be people who want it to remain on Schedule I. The point is they want people to be involved in the process. At the Drug Policy Alliance, we're pushing people to submit public comment in support of descheduling. And I have a link that makes it very easy for people to fill out a public comment. It's a generic public comment that they can individualize as they'd like, and it will go directly to the DEA. I'll be sure to share that link with you. That way you can share it with your listeners.
Yeah, definitely. Always in the show notes, and we can put it in the newsletter. And I've done this myself. It's very easy. Very easy.
Yes. Very easy. Wanted to make sure it was very easy. But, at the end of the day, despite what happens with the DEA review order, there are two things that we actually need. We need the Biden administration to actually use all the power. Like, he has executive authority. Like, he has the power to do things through the executive branch. So we're pushing him to take executive action on marijuana. We actually want him to pursue clemencies and pardons for marijuana beyond simple possession. I talked about how in October he did pardon some federal offenses, but unfortunately nobody was released from jail because of those offenses, because they were simple possession. Most federal convictions are more complicated than simple possession.
Right.
So we want him to go further on that. We also want him to provide guidance to his different agencies so that people are no longer punished for marijuana activities, so that they're not kicked out of their houses. They're not banned from receiving licenses.
So that is a huge one. And I also talk about that a lot about women who are using cannabis, medical cannabis with their doctor's approval, who are having babies. So I live in Massachusetts. There's 2 hospitals in Massachusetts that they won't the mandated reporting doesn't happen unless there's another issue. Otherwise, everyone else who's in that medical community believes that you are harming your child, and they feel that they are required to report you and involve children's services. And I know this happens across the country, except in Arizona. Something happened in Arizona. But again, that idea that if you have a rule that says you are mandated to report because there is harm to a child because it is on the schedule at 1, what else are people going to believe? So this is a big one for people in housing. I used to work in subsidized housing with low-income families, and this is another huge one, that you can't access it. So yeah, that's really, again, just to reiterate what you're saying, that's really important about that whole other issue of like who's reporting people and who's denying people access to things, because it was erroneous. the reason it's on Schedule 1 is a very bad reason, and now we're
Right.
trying to flip it the other way. Yeah.
Yeah, and no, this is great, and I'm glad that you mentioned that because you just named another example of in another way, I should say, in which the drug war shows up. There are so many ways in which the drug war shows up that people might not even be aware of, but that definitely is one example. But these are things that, again, President Biden can address to some extent by providing guidance, asking his agencies to review their own guidance on how they deal with marijuana activity. So we're going to push him to do that. But we also need federal legislation. And this is really important because, one, I don't think we're going to get descheduling through this administrative review process. It sounds like we're going to be stuck with rescheduling a Schedule 3 recommendation. So in order to get us to a place of actual decriminalization, we need legislation that will remove marijuana from the CSA. In addition to that, we also want to see marijuana legalized. And we want to see a regulatory framework created that centers social justice, equity, health. And the way to do that, again, is through legislation. So we really need Congress to act. This is why we're pushing Congress in the House. We're pushing them to support the MORE Act, the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. And in the Senate, there's a bill called the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, the bill I talked about earlier, the CAOA. The bills are very similar. They essentially do the same thing. They both deschedule marijuana, resentence and expunge marijuana convictions, address the collateral consequences of marijuana convictions, and build a regulatory framework for marijuana regulation. There are slight differences in the bills, but again, essentially they do the same thing, and we're hoping that lawmakers join those bills as supporters, because at the end of the day, we are going to need legislation to really fix this problem and have like a system that works well for everyone.
I mean, we created the problem. I mean, I always talk about alcohol. People like to do the parallels, and they're not really the same. Alcohol is not on the Controlled Substance Act.
Yep.
Alcohol was made legal again by a congressional act. That took a long time for prohibition to sort of wheel its way through, but there's a way to do it. We've done it before, and we're doing it with something that's better for us actually than alcohol, and we can do this. I believe we can do this. So do you see? All right. So everybody in my world, they have mixed feelings about the parabola. I'll just kind of back off. The Parabola Center out here with Shailene Title and Lori Lucy and Chanel Lindsay. I believe them when they talk. I believe what they say. So they're more concerned about big pharma coming in, big tobacco coming in if it stays on as a Schedule 3. So when you're looking at this, it looks like Schedule 3 is going to happen. What is it we need to do to make sure that it doesn't get stuck there? I mean, you talk about the legislation, but do you think Congress, I don't know, like, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, because I get worried that what they're saying is true. It'll get stuck at 3. And then all these businesses, it's always a business issue. This is very state specific. Maybe there'll be more research. That's really the dream.
Yeah.
But it's always the minutia. The policy issues are always with the details. I had an attorney on last week talking about this too, but the business people keep coming back saying 280E is gone and it's going to be all great and we're going to get the money back, which my other friends don't think is true either. So where do you see this happening and how do we make sure it doesn't get stuck there? Yeah.
Yeah, we really are in uncharted territory. I share some of the concerns that the Parabola Center has. I think rescheduling without safeguards in place, which could include, regulatory, some sort of regulatory control coming down from the administration. It could include legislation. I do think we need something more to just ensure that it's like not a free for all when marijuana is moved to Schedule 3, because I share concerns about, if the 280E tax penalty does go away and the Schedule 3 does open the door to, possibly paving the path for pharmaceutical marijuana, that we're facing a situation where big pharma and MSOs, like the big marijuana companies, are going to take over. So we have to be really thoughtful about that. So I'm hoping that we see some sort of regulations come down from the administration. But at the end of the day, like I said, I think it's really important that we get legislation passed through Congress, which is going to be a huge feat, because I don't have to tell you, Congress is extremely partisan, extremely broken, but they really need to address this.
What do you think about so here in Massachusetts, when medical came in, it was vertically integrated. It had seed to sale. but it seems like a terrible model. So, and it seems like what alcohol did at some point is they broke everything up, so you couldn't have as many big monopolies. I mean, do you see that as maybe business wouldn't allow, but do you see this as a good idea to say, nowhere can we have seed to sale? I mean, you have to break those up, so it gives access to more people to be in the industry because more producers, not more middlemen, or more like, other individuals who can sell to bigger people. I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm definitely not a monopoly expert like Parabola
Yeah.
is, but to
Yeah.
me, intuitively, it makes sense to break it up.
Yeah.
Because I could see a situation where we see what happens in other industries where, one company starts to take over and then buy up other similar companies. And then like you have really like three big names running like a whole sector of a business. That's never good for consumers. Never. It means higher prices. The quality of service is, less. And it also makes me concerned about the quality of the product and like the impact
Yeah.
that can have on the person. So
I mean, my whole, I don't know, my vision for this is the plant is a caregiver. This should be run by the caregivers. We should be creating an industry that's not like every other industry. And part of that is having lots of different people involved in this at many different levels. So having the seed to sale kind of cuts that part out, and it cuts small businesses out. America used to like to make money. That was our jam. And we used to say small businesses were
yeah.
the base of our economy. And this is the most perfect small business kind of opportunity right now, especially now because it's also state specific. So if they could back up on some of the regulations, not make it so expensive, treat it like plutonium, and then let people engage in a way that they want to do these products. I mean, all the women I know, they really want to build these industries and make it look like a better place. So, and I know the Parabola survey came out. I have some of the stats.
Oh yeah.
It should benefit locally owned and small businesses. That was a really high percentage. Uh, it should benefit medical patients, which are sort of getting lost in this conversation, really. Um, lived experience, people who know how to use this, creating good cannabis policy. There is out in the world, people want this to look differently, and I know we have the capacity, and so that's kind of interesting. All right. So you talked a little bit about how people can help. Maybe just kind of go over it again. If you are interested in doing some of this advocacy work, if you want to contact your congressperson, if you just want to like make sure that this doesn't become big business like everything else, let me know. Just kind of go over your list again.
Yeah. So I guess I would start with definitely engage in this opportunity that we're getting right now to make our voices heard on the DEA proposed rule to move marijuana to Schedule 3. I'll share a link that'll make it really easy for you to provide a public comment. It'll go directly to the DEA. It'll be a comment in support of descheduling. In other words, a comment in support of decriminalizing marijuana. You're able to modify the comment however you wish with that link. In addition to that, and by the way, you have to do that by July 22nd. It's a brief opportunity, so do that by July 22nd. And then it's really important that you start to reach out to your members of Congress and ask them to support descheduling legislation. So in the House, that's the MORE Act, and in the Senate, that's the CAOA. And I can share links as well, making it very easy to contact your members, asking them to co-sponsor either of those bills. So those are the top two things that you can do. I would also recommend that generally you just follow the Drug Policy Alliance and follow the work that we're doing. We provide a lot of updates in our work regularly to our followers, including on social media. So definitely check out drugpolicy.org if you haven't yet.
Good. And so we have to talk about cannabis because cannabis is cannabis, but I do talk more about psychedelics in this world. And I know the people at MAPS, and just like how is that working with the work that you're doing now with the drug policy?
That's a good question. So DPA has been more focused historically on marijuana only because other great groups like MAPS have been really taking leadership on psychedelics.
Yeah.
That said, we are all, like, we know that psychedelics are on the cusp of being regulated, I think, just like marijuana is. So we are just watching what's happening. Like marijuana, we want to make sure that when this is regulated, that it's done in a way that centers health, equity, justice, all of those things at the forefront. I'm not the DPA person who is responsible for that, though. So unfortunately, I can't share any more information beyond that.
But it is, I mean, I will say, so psychedelics have really not come in as a business, and cannabis came in as a business. So it seems like they're on different paths. I mean, and maybe that is because of MAPS, because they're sort of, focused on one thing. And again, cannabis is very state specific. To have a federal policy that would, make this makes sense. We're losing out to other parts of the world. This is, again, kind of coming back to the business part. America used to like to make money. And this is really an interesting industry that's homegrown. It's made here. It's in America. And if we had some federal policies, so interstate commerce, we'd help our farmers. I don't know. This seems like there's a better way to do it if we could get our act together. And psychedelics just seems like they're going to come in at the federal level before anything else because
I
they're
agree with
helping
that.
they're helping veterans really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is something I've noticed as a lobbyist, somebody who has to engage with the Hill often. I've noticed that there's more support, more bipartisan support for psychedelics than marijuana, which is, to me, it's confusing and not, but like, I'm like, wow, like if you understand that we can use this as therapy, why would you not understand that for marijuana? But there seems to be more openness to psychedelics, oddly enough, or maybe not oddly enough. I don't know, but I agree with you. I think we're going to see more happen on psychedelics before marijuana.
I don't know for sure, but it's always about narratives. The narrative of what psychedelics and cannabis are, whatever you believe.
Yep.
But because, again, cannabis keeps coming in as recreational or adult use versus medical, like we've sort of pitted those against each other. Not to mention we've literally pitted hemp against cannabis, which is ridiculous. So this one plant has been really sort of pitted up. It feels like psychedelics, it stayed on that medical route. They're just trying to like get it through, get it through, get it through, and then it's been like 50-year struggle. I mean, MAPS has been doing this forever. You got to have a lot of patience. So maybe that's where it is. All right. Let's just flip this. Your family. So you said you grew up in a nice family out in Nevada. Cannabis was not part of your family history. Psychedelics, I'm sure, weren't either. So when kind of wish, I guess what was your personal relationship with cannabis, and then how did this work with your family when you decided this is the work you're going to do?
Yeah, very good question. I've oddly enough, I've never, well, I'm not a consumer, and
Okay.
I've tried it before, just like I feel like everyone has at this point. I remember in law school, like was my first experience with it. I went to Berkeley, which is like very marijuana friendly. So it's like I couldn't avoid it if I wanted to. It was just like everywhere.
Okay.
But I never had a good experience with it.
That's so funny.
Yeah, and maybe it's because I've like thought about this a lot. I'm like, why did I not have a good experience? And I feel like it's because of like that Mormon guilt. Like, even though I don't identify as Mormon anymore, I feel like I got in my head about it. And I think that matters, right? You want to be like in a good space. And I think I was like still like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, which
Oh,
is
yes.
so, but it's like stuff that very
Setting, very important. Yeah.
yeah. That said, like I don't mind gummies. Like, I'll like now I if I don't use melatonin, I find that gummies are really helpful to help me fall asleep. But beyond that, I don't really engage. For me,
That's so interesting that you're so knee deep in this world, and
I
but
know.
even the last Prisoners Project, we're all set up in front of the White House,
Yeah.
and this group of eighth graders are walking by, going, "What's cannabis or cannabis?" I can't even remember how he said it, and the teacher's like, "Marijuana, move on, move on." But people
Oh
are out
my
there
gosh.
smoking and doing their thing and hanging out. But yeah, and you've dedicated so much of your life to this. That's
I
interesting.
know.
Yeah.
Well, that's, because I really, well, first of all, I know the value that people find in it. And I think that's really important to advocate for it, because just because I had a bad experience, I know that not, that's not normal. I feel like people find it therapeutic, people find it relaxing, people find it joyful. Like there's a lot of reasons people consume, and I want to support that. But for me, I'm at the end of the day an advocate for racial justice and criminal justice, and that's why I do this work. Like that's what motivates me, because I see a lot of injustice in how our marijuana laws are meted out and how they were created in the first place. So that's the driver behind me doing this work. It is funny though, because like my friends know I do this work, so they're always bringing me all of their products, and they just want to show me. I don't know why, but I don't know. They're always like, "Look what I'm taking. I'm taking this, or I'm doing that."
All right.
I
So
don't know why.
people whisper, I'm active in my temple, and
Yeah.
people like lean over to me, be like, "I had a gummy." I'm like, "That's great."
Yeah, I get a lot of that too, and I'm like, I have no idea what that means, or but I'm glad they want to share with me.
That is so funny. All right, I would do get some. Okay, and your family. So you were really getting into this for the criminal justice, but did it spark conversations about cannabis or other drug policy uses or how people integrate it into their lifestyle? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I have a lot of siblings, and they're they're about my age or younger, and they all get it, and they're very proud of me, and they think it's cool. I got to say, my parents, I don't know if they quite understand what exactly I do.
My mother
You
thought I
know,
was in a drug cartel till the day she died. She just did not understand why I would be
right?
doing
Yeah,
this.
yeah. Like I think it's funny. I think my dad, who is still Mormon, I think he thinks I'm doing the opposite. I think he thinks I'm like stopping people from doing drugs. I don't think he I don't think he understands. And I'm not trying to clarify it for him. I'm like, I'll let him think what he wants.
Mhm.
My mom, like, I think she gets it, and like she gets it, but I feel like I remember when I went to law school, she was like, you're choosing to do this? Why? Like, had so many questions, which I totally get because, they're both immigrants. She immigrated from Mexico. And I feel like in her eyes, she's like, I worked really hard for my daughter to help people who are convicted of crimes, right? Like, which is how she
That's
sees it. But
that's
I think he comes
America.
from it. Exactly. Yeah.
But okay, so I have heard a lot of stories about people their parents are very upset, but then
Yeah.
they'll give them like hand creams. Good CBD creams seem to
Yeah.
be a perfect gateway drug because people will use it and their hands will feel better, and then they'll ask you what else you have because they see it. And they also the narratives, I'm sure you hear this all the time, the narratives of healing. So someone who usually the stories I share are usually women who have come to the end of their ropes. They don't know what else to do. They're desperate and they try cannabis usually out of desperation. And then when they have that first moment of relief or whatever experience they have, and they recognize that it's not what they're being told, and that opens up that ability to be like, oh, maybe what I know is wrong. Because it's really hard to like change people's belief. And when you believe things for a certain reason. So have you
Yeah.
seen I don't know, like any of that? Like your parents like, well, maybe my hands hurt. I've heard this could help, or sleep. People are always looking for help with sleep. Yeah.
Well, I feel like my dad is a lost cause and he would never, no matter what.
Okay.
But
Okay.
my mom is different. Like, I think she started to come around or understand more what I'm doing because she's struggled with rheumatoid arthritis for like the
Mm,
last few years, over 10 years at this point.
wow.
And I feel like she has learned about CBD because of her rheumatoid arthritis and she has found it helpful.
Hmm.
So she's on board with the marijuana. She gets that. The larger
Okay.
criminal justice reform, not so much, but like marijuana, yes.
Well, that's interesting. That's
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that. So if we are a nation of law and
Yeah.
order in theory, although we're going to have a federally prosecuted candidate, but that's another story. But criminal justice, if you believe that laws are proper and they're implemented correctly and fairly, and then the idea that you're going in and saying not always. So, it kind of goes back to again, why was cannabis put on the control? Why was the Controlled Substance Act created? Why was cannabis put on the Controlled Substance Act? Again, tobacco and alcohol are not on there. And how was it being used to control people? I mean, I'm
Yep.
not a conspiratorial person, but that is how it was being used.
Mhm.
And now there are finally people out there, and I say this a lot about my generation of women. I'm 59. More than half my law school class was women. One of my law school classmates is now governor of Massachusetts. You know, there are women out there who think about things differently and they have some power and access. And now they're looking at these laws and saying maybe they weren't right. And they're using the power they have, the status they have, really to change things. That's really pretty powerful. Otherwise, you need some outside thinking. You need someone to come in and be like, why is this the way it is? And obviously we know it's wrong. And so we need people to fight it. I think it's very impressive that you can sort of stand up and see it.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I don't know what they taught you in law school, but just
Berkeley was pretty good. Berkeley was
you
pretty
what?
good about teaching us, very progressive curriculum, which I did definitely appreciated, especially again, like coming from like a rural background where I wasn't exposed to a lot of that. Like,
Mhm.
I'm really grateful for that. And I'm also glad that you brought up like generally just the history of drug laws, particularly marijuana. I mean, when
Mhm.
you're talking about controlling people, marijuana first came on the books in the 1930s. Well, really the early 1900s, but in the 1930s in the federal criminal codes. And the decision to call it marijuana was strategic. At the time, the person who was in control of federal drug policy wanted to call cannabis marijuana in the federal code to make it sound Spanish or foreign because they wanted to associate it with Mexicans and Mexican Americans to find an easier way to not only deport them, but to control them, jail them, and whatnot. And still how it's referenced in the federal codes.
Yeah.
So there is like some, even to this day, there's actually a lot of controversy in the marijuana space on like, do we call it marijuana? Do we call it cannabis? Because of that racist history. I still call it marijuana.
I know, I was gonna say, you call it marijuana, yeah.
I do, yeah, because to me, cannabis sounds very whitewashed. It sounds very corporate, and I get why people use it because that's
Yeah.
the scientific name. But
Yeah.
it's like it's interesting that it's like all these cannabis bros and like all these companies that are tossing that term around. So I just never felt good about it for that reason. But in addition to that, like the people that I know, people from my community, no one calls it cannabis. Like, that's so sterile. It like doesn't resonate with the public, or at least the public I'm trying to communicate to.
Right, yeah.
They know weed, they know marijuana. There's other names that people use, but not cannabis.
Yeah.
Which is why I still make the decision to call it marijuana.
That's so funny. Yeah, because I mean we do a ganja. I just went to a ganja ball.
Yep. Oh, fun.
But the marijuana, I assume at some point that word will probably be taken back, just like all
That's
other
what I feel.
words. Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like it.
Yeah.
Because so when that's kind of like policy legislative. So when this legislation is being written, is it duly referred to, or is it only referred to as marijuana? Like how do they talk about it?
That's really interesting question because like I said, people are all over the place. There's not like people have different viewpoints on this. So
Yeah.
I'll take you back to when we were drafting the House version of our descheduling bill, and that's the MORE Act.
Mm-hmm.
The MORE Act, it's, marijuana is in the title, Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. And the House actually wanted to call it cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, we were trying to find a Senate co-lead of the bill. And we went to Senator Harris. At the time, she was Senator Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And her office, she herself was very adamant about continuing to call it marijuana because she was also of the mindset that we need to reclaim that, take it back. So we ended up calling it the MORE Act. And it's interesting because the MORE Act takes out the term marijuana throughout the federal code and replaces it with cannabis.
Oh,
That's
really?
what it does. Yeah, but then we end up calling it marijuana throughout the bill. The Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act is more consistent because it's, there's cannabis in the name, and then also we take it also takes the term marijuana from the federal code, replaces it with cannabis. But that's just like an example of, there's still not agreement.
So how does that work with, I mean, like hemp is basically made up, the definition for hemp. So is there any correlation between the plant and I don't, that's, hemp is a made up term. It's got 0.3%, whatever. It's in the farm bill. Maybe that'll change. Maybe, well, but it's literally the same plant. So I don't know what these definitions are stated, but is that any part of the Cannabis Reform Acts, or is hemp just totally still left out because it's in the farm bill, so it's legal? It's just
that's left out. Yeah. Hemp is
Mhm.
kind of seen as its own thing now. It's not really addressed in either bill.
Yeah. But there are issues with the, people, they're pulling out the cannabinoids and they're trying to like stop this problem that shouldn't even exist. Oy, people. All right. So we talked a little bit about the legislation, the other things that are happening. Do you look forward? Like, what are you thinking? America's drug policy, 5 years. What is your like vision for that? I mean, maybe that's too big a vision, but where are you heading with your, your work?
Yeah, so I'll start with marijuana just because we were talking about it. I do have some optimism around marijuana. I do think that attitudes are changing. I'm hopeful that we'll continue to see federal reform, including possibly the passage of federal legislation.
Mm-hmm.
The stars will have to align and all of that for that to happen, but I'm hopeful it can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't get legislation, I'm confident we'll get more federal reform. At the end of the day, Schedule 3 is not what we wanted, but I'm hoping, and I think it will inspire more federal reform. I think we'll also see reform around psychedelics, which is good news. I think outside of that, generally we've seen more support for harm reduction approaches to drug activity. Unfortunately, our country is still in the midst of one of the deadliest, if not the deadliest, overdose epidemic we've seen. But I think that's, in some ways, a result of that has been that you have the drug warriors who are out there saying we need to criminalize everything, who haven't learned anything over the past 50 years. But on the other hand, you have people who have realized that, wow, maybe what we've been doing for decades isn't working. It's just created mass incarceration and the highest levels of overdose we've ever experienced. So I'm hoping that the
I always
public,
say it's like bad parenting. Like every time I hear
right,
these like arguments, I'm like, you're just being a bad parent. Like, you know, it's not working.
it's
Change.
not
Yeah.
working.
Yeah, it's not working.
And I think that we're going to have to realize that just because of just the levels of overdose that we're seeing right now are unreal. And we have seen more, uh, like a warmer, attitude toward harm reduction at the federal level. You know, people now are understanding that naloxone saves lives. People are becoming more comfortable with things like syringe service programs that help people.
So that's something. So that and like centers, is that something you advocate for
Yeah,
federally?
yeah,
Because I know
advocate for overdose prevention centers. Yep,
there's been a lot of controversy about where do they go, what's happening to them.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
I think we will be moving the needle on those though. I think like addressing drug use from a public health perspective, I think will become more normal in the next
hmm
few years. You know, we got to continue to push for that, but that's our job. Our job is to educate the public and lawmakers about how these tactics actually save lives. So I do find some hope there. I do think, we'll see more of that.
I mean, I do think, again, it's like anything. When you're personally touched by this, it changes the conversation. So just more and more people in America are being impacted by opiate use, or, a perfectly healthy person who gets into this cycle, and there's too many people are in it. So the more people who see it, there has to be some address to this issue, because we want to love the people we love. And if we can see the drugs it's not really the drugs. I mean, it's the sort of the culture around it. Like, even comes back to cannabis. So it
Yep.
wasn't so much the cannabis use that was getting people in trouble. Like, when they were using, they were fine. It was the process of getting it. So, it's so dangerous to access this plant. And is what would end you up in jail. It wasn't the actual use of it. So we're changing the narrative, right? One story at a
Mhm.
time. Yeah. Oh, it's actually time. Okay. I think we went over this a little bit, but what is your favorite way to consume?
I would say gummies because I actually find that really relaxing. Like a gummy when it's hard to sleep. I used it when I had COVID and nothing was working. I couldn't sleep. My friend gave me a gummy. She's like, try this, it'll knock you out. And it did. So gummies when it's hard to sleep.
And actually, so what, just explain, what's it like in Washington, D.C.? Just because every state is different, you're different. I was down there, and
Yeah.
like I went into a store and they told me to buy a sticker, and they had pot there. It was just a very weird, it wasn't really a dispensary. So what's the legality, and what is it like to purchase bad products down there?
Well, I don't purchase products, but
Okay.
my friend does. My friend
Okay.
does. And I've learned from her that it's actually fairly easy. You just need a medical card because I, even though they legalized adult use, the federal government has been holding them back from implementing adult use, but
Okay.
not so much on the medical marijuana side. So
Okay.
if you have a medical marijuana card, it's easy. My friend says that there's an easy delivery service. She's never had a problem. Everyone, actually, more than one person has told me that it's very, very easy to purchase in DC. So
So are you considered a federal employee?
no.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering, because federal employees probably can't have access to this at all, or they'll be tested. How does that work?
Well, I mean, they do have access. They
Like,
would just have to be, if I were a federal employee, I would not share that information
yes,
because
exactly. Yeah.
unfortunately, you can still be fired and drug tested at the federal level, which, something else that Biden can change. He has the power to change that.
I mean, that's interesting, because this is kind of coming back to the women. So if you're a medical cannabis patient here in Massachusetts, it's on your record. So, which is what happens when women go in to give birth. They can see that they're medical patients, which is why they test the meconium, which is how they get children's services. So it kind of backfires on people who are trying to get the right way to access this. Yeah. We're gonna work on this. All right. So much to do. Thank you for your work. I mean, it just, again, this is a state by state issue. We need some federal guidelines. This could be something that's really good for everyone. I say it's patriotic, it's American made, it's good for small business, it's healthy for women my age and older, it's better for seniors, like we talked about earlier. uh Alcohol and cannabis, they're kind of catching up to each other, and I would argue that cannabis consumers are healthier. That was all right. Maritza, if people want to reach out to you, connect with the work you're doing, or want to contact you in any way, what's the best way to reach you?
I'm on Twitter, excuse me, or X, I think is what it's called now.
No one is ever going to call it X. It's so funny. No one
Right.
ever just starts with
Weird.
X. Yeah.
Yeah. Weird. But you can find me at Maritza Perez Med. And I will share that also in case that's easier to just share a link. I'm also on Instagram. But yeah, I'll share those handles. But I think the best way to be in touch with the work that we're doing is to follow the Drug Policy Alliance. We're all over social media as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story and the work you're doing. Because, federal level, this is like, it's getting up there and really it's coming. I've been talking about this for 5 or 6 years now. So, things have changed. So it's happening. It's going to be legal. And this woman and her agency and all these people have been helped to create it. So thank you for my guest, Maritza Perez Medina, and of course my Canna Road David Jazz and our Canna Mom Show team. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the Canna Mom Show, where we're on a mission to impact the stories women have on the emerging cannabis industry by sharing and preserving their stories of love, kindness, wisdom, and hope. Thank you for following and sharing the amazing stories of these women so that together we can crush that stigma around cannabis and caregivers. I'm your host, Joyce Gerber. This is the Canna Mom Show, and we are a production of Pod 617, the Boston Podcast Network.